October 24, 1932, 02:14 a.m., the Waldorf Astoria, New York City. The scent of expensive Turkish tobacco and Italian leather filled the private suite. Outside, the Great Depression was strangling the throat of the world, but inside the air was heavy with the smell of old money and new power. A single glass of scotch sat on a mahogany table, the ice melting into a slow, rhythmic clink, clink, clink. Charles Lucky Luciano, the man who was currently reorganizing the American underworld into a corporate machine, leaned back in his chair. Opposite him, two shadows sat, ragged, dusty, and smelling of cordite and cheap gasoline. "You're a long way from Texas, Bonnie," Luciano said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. His eyes didn't flicker. He looked at the petite woman with the strawberry blonde hair and the man beside her, Clyde Barrow, whose grip never left the Browning automatic rifle resting across his lap. "We go where the money is, Charlie," Clyde replied. His voice was a sharp contrast, rural, jagged, and defensive. "And right now the money is being moved by your people in the Midwest. We've been hitting your couriers. We didn't know they were yours. We just knew they had the green." Luciano smiled, but there was no warmth in it. This was the new order. The days of messy street wars were over. The era of the syndicate had begun. He didn't want these two ghosts from the Dust Bowl dead. Not yet. He wanted them as a distraction. The FBI was starting to look too closely at the Atlantic City Commission. He needed a smokescreen. He needed two untouchable, high-speed legends to lead the feds on a goose chase across the state lines while he consolidated the heroin trade. "I'm going to make you a deal," Luciano whispered, leaning forward. "I provide the cars, Ford V8s, straight from the factory lines I control. I provide the intel, bank schedules, payroll routes, police frequencies. In exchange, you never hit a syndicate truck again. You hit the banks that refuse our protection. You become the noise so I can work in the silence." Bonnie looked at Clyde. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the fatigue of sleeping in stolen cars and eating cold beans from a can. This was the deal of a lifetime. They weren't just outlaws anymore. They were about to become the syndicate's ghost division. "What's the catch?" Bonnie asked, her thumb tracing the edge of a silk scarf Luciano had draped over the table. "The catch," Luciano said, standing up to look out at the dark New York skyline, "is that once you start, you can't stop. You become invincibles. But an invincible flame burns out twice as fast." The hook. Bonnie reached out and took the scotch. She drank it in one go. She didn't know it yet, but the liquid felt like the first drop of blood in a lake they were about to drown in. November 12, 1932, 14:30 p.m., a warehouse in Dearborn, Michigan. To understand how a couple of small-time Texas stick-up artists became the most feared names in America, you have to understand the steel. In 1932, the Ford V8 was the king of the road. It was faster than any police cruiser and tougher than any roadblock. Through Luciano's connections with the corrupt unions in Detroit, Bonnie and Clyde were no longer stealing whatever they could find on a street corner. They were being handed the keys to the future. Clyde ran his hand over the hood of a midnight blue Model 18. It was a masterpiece of engineering, reinforced with steel plating behind the rear seats, Luciano's personal touch. "She's a beauty," Clyde muttered. He could feel the power of the 65-horsepower engine through the metal. It felt like a weapon. "It's more than a car, Clyde," said Frank Costello's man, a silent enforcer who had escorted them to the warehouse. "It's a fortress. The tires are foam-filled. You can take a dozen rounds and keep rolling at 60 miles an hour." In the corner of the warehouse, Bonnie was looking at a map provided by the syndicate. It wasn't just a map. It was a blueprint of the American financial system's weaknesses. It marked the blind spots between state jurisdictions, the no-man's land where the local sheriffs couldn't cross, and the federal agents hadn't yet arrived. Luciano had mapped out the loopholes of the law. "We hit the National Bank in Indiana tomorrow," Bonnie said, her eyes glowing with a manic intensity. "The syndicate says the vault will be open for a payroll delivery at 10:15. The local police chief is on the payroll. He'll delay the sirens by 5 minutes. 5 minutes. In a Ford V8, 5 minutes was an eternity. It was the difference between a shootout and a clean getaway. They were no longer desperate kids running from a gas station robbery. They were the precision instruments of a national crime conglomerate. But as Clyde started the engine, the roar echoing against the corrugated iron walls, he felt a shiver. He wasn't the driver anymore. He was a pilot for a man he'd only met once. The car didn't belong to him. Neither did his life. The hook. As they sped out of Detroit, Bonnie noticed a black sedan following them at a distance. It wasn't the police. It was Luciano's watchers. The deal had begun, and the shadows were already closing in. December 5th, 1932. 11:00 a.m. Terre Haute, Indiana. The snow was falling in heavy, wet flakes that turned the cobblestones into a slick, grey mess. The air smelled of coal smoke and wet wool. Inside the Terre Haute National Bank, the clock ticked with agonizing slowness. Bonnie sat in the idling Ford V8, her fingers drumming on the steering wheel. She was wearing a beret, a cigarette dangling from her lips, looking every bit the movie star she dreamed of being. Inside, Clyde was a whirlwind of calculated violence. Following Luciano's instructions, he didn't just scream and wave a gun. He moved with the terrifying calmness of a professional. He knew exactly where the manager kept the keys to the inner cage, because the syndicate had sent him the blueprints 2 days prior. "Empty the third drawer first," Clyde commanded, his bar leveled at the teller's chest. "Don't touch the die packs. I know they're there." The teller's hands shook so violently the coins spilled like silver rain on the marble floor. How do you know about the die packs?" "A bird told me," Clyde smirked. The robbery took exactly 3 minutes. As they burst out of the doors, the local sheriff was standing across the street holding a cup of coffee. He looked at Clyde, looked at the bag of cash, and then looked away. He turned his back and started walking in the opposite direction. The bribe had landed. The Invincibles were born. But as they tore out of town, the effetto lenda, legend effect, began to take hold. People weren't just terrified, they were fascinated. They saw a couple who could walk into a bank, take what they wanted, and have the law turn its back. The newspapers, also influenced by Luciano's media contacts, began to paint them as Robin Hood figures. "Look at this, Clyde," Bonnie said, tossing a newspaper into the back seat that evening. The headline read, "The Ghosts of the Midwest. Why can't the law stop them?" "They can't stop us because we're not just two people anymore," Clyde said, cleaning his rifle in a dingy motel room. "We're a part of something bigger." But that night, Bonnie had a dream. She saw Luciano sitting at the Waldorf, pulling strings that were attached to her wrists. Every time she moved, she felt the tug. The hook. A knock came at the door. Not the police. A courier in a sharp suit. He handed them an envelope. Inside was a photo of a man Clyde recognized, a fellow Texan. The note read, "He's talking to the Bureau. Eliminate the leak. January 18th, 1933. 22:12 p.m. A back road outside Joplin, Missouri." The leak was a man named Jimmy the Gent Miller. He had been a driver for the Barrow Gang in the early days, a kid who liked the thrill but couldn't handle the heat. He had been picked up by the feds in Chicago and was starting to sing about the New York connection. Luciano's orders were clear. The Invincibles had to stay clean of federal interference, and that meant silencing anyone who could bridge the gap between the Texas outlaws and the Italian mafia. The rain was a cold needle prick against the skin. Clyde stood by the edge of a muddy ravine, his coat flapping in the wind. Jimmy was kneeling in the dirt, sobbing. "Clyde, please. We grew up together. I didn't tell him nothing important," Jimmy wailed. Clyde looked at the man and saw his own past. He saw the amateurish, desperate world they used to inhabit. But then he felt the weight of the gold watch on his wrist, a gift from Luciano. He felt the power of the syndicate behind him. To go back to being a small-time thief was to choose death. To stay with Luciano was to choose a different kind of death, but one with a legacy. "You mentioned New York, Jimmy," Clyde said, his voice flat. "That's a death sentence in any language." Bonnie stood by the car, the headlights casting long, demonic shadows across the field. She didn't look away. She had become hardened, the romanticism of their crusade replaced by the cold logic of the syndicate. Crack. The sound of the shot was swallowed by the thunder. They left Jimmy in the mud. As they drove away, the silence in the car was deafening. This was the first time they had killed not for survival, but for the business. "We're soldiers now, Bonnie," Clyde whispered. "Soldiers or hitmen?" she replied, staring at her reflection in the window. The hook. When they reached their safe house, they found a crate waiting for them. It wasn't guns. It was high-end clothes, champagne, and a camera. Luciano wanted them to take more photos. He wanted the legend to grow. He wanted the world to fall in love with the monsters he had created. February 20th, 1933. Around 9 a.m., Chicago, Illinois. The legend effect was now at its peak. Bonnie and Clyde were the biggest stars in America. Their photos, Bonnie with the cigar, Clyde leaning against the V8, were in every household. Luciano's plan was working perfectly. While Edgar Hoover obsessed over the Barrow Gang, Luciano was quietly moving 40% of the nation's illegal alcohol and narcotics through the very routes Bonnie and Clyde were clearing by drawing police attention. In Chicago, they met with Al Capone's remnants, now under the thumb of the Commission. The city felt like a tomb. The neon signs flickered over empty soup lines. "The big man wants you to hit the armored car on 5th and Main," a mob lieutenant told them. "It's a Federal Reserve transfer. It's suicide for anyone else. For you, it's just another Tuesday." Clyde felt the arrogance growing. He felt untouchable. "Tell Luciano we'll do it. But I want a bigger cut. The risks are getting higher. The feds are bringing in Thompson submachine guns." The lieutenant laughed. "You think you're in a position to negotiate, kid? You're the flash. You're the bright light that keeps the bulls from seeing the man in the corner. You get what we give you." Clyde's hand twitched toward his holster. Bonnie stepped in, her voice like silk. "We'll do it. Just make sure the escape route is clear. No accidental roadblocks this time." The heist was a bloodbath. 2 guards died. 1 civilian was caught in the crossfire. The syndicate had intentionally leaked the wrong time to the local police to ensure a shootout. They wanted the headlines to be violent. They wanted Hoover to be embarrassed. As they sped away, the interior of the Ford was sprayed with glass and blood. Clyde was breathing hard, a graze on his shoulder. "They set us up, Bonnie. They wanted a fight." "They don't want us to just be thieves, Clyde," Bonnie said, wiping blood off her cheek. "They want us to be martyrs." The hook. That night, for the first time, the radio broadcast a new name. Not just the Barrow Gang. They were called the Luciano Puppets. Someone was leaking the truth, and the syndicate didn't like truth. April 14th, 1933. 03:30 a.m. A hidden cabin, Black Hills, Arkansas. The invincibility was a lie. The steel plating in the Ford V8 couldn't protect them from the psychological toll of being hunted by an entire nation. Clyde's dreams were filled with the faces of the men he'd killed for the syndicate. Bonnie's poetry, once filled with romance, was now dark and nihilistic. "They're going to kill us, Clyde," she said, sitting by the fireplace. The only light came from the dying embers. "Luciano isn't protecting us. He's fattening us up for the slaughter." "We can't leave," Clyde said, his eyes bloodshot. "Where would we go? Every cop in the country knows our faces. Every mobster from here to Vegas knows our car. We're in a cage, Bonnie. It's just a very fast cage." A messenger arrived at dawn. It was a young boy, barely 15, riding a bicycle. He handed them a note on heavy, cream-colored stationery. "The Commission is pleased with your progress. However, the heat in the Midwest is too high. Move south. Louisiana. We have a property there. Wait for instructions." "Louisiana is a trap," Bonnie whispered. "It's too quiet. No escape routes." "It's an order," Clyde snapped. "If we defy Luciano, we don't just have the cops after us. We have the outfit. We have the Mangano family. We have the hitmen who don't miss." They packed their bags. The Ford V8, now battered and bullet-scarred, roared to life. But the engine sounded different. It sounded tired. Or maybe it was just them. As they drove through the small towns, they saw their own faces on wanted posters. But now there was a new detail. A reward. $5,000. In 1933, that was enough to make a brother betray a brother. The hook. As they crossed the border into Louisiana, they passed a black sedan parked on the shoulder. Inside, a man was talking into a radio, a new technology for the police. The syndicate had stopped paying the bribes. The Invincibles were being deregulated. May 10, 1933. 18:00 p.m. Bienville Parish, Louisiana. The property Luciano had provided was a shack owned by the Methvin family. Henry Methvin had been running with the Barrow Gang for a few months, a syndicate plant meant to keep an eye on them. The air was thick with the smell of swamp water and jasmine. It was beautiful in a haunting way, but the tension was a physical weight. Clyde kept his bar within reach even when he slept. Bonnie spent her days reading magazines, looking at the lives of women who weren't running for their lives. "You guys are legends," Henry Methvin said, leaning against the porch. "My old man says people talk about you like you're gods, like bullets just bounce off you." "Bullets don't bounce off anyone, Henry," Clyde said, cleaning a pistol. "We're just lucky. And luck is a currency. You spend it every day until the account is empty." What Clyde didn't know was that Henry's father, Ivy Methvin, had already met with Sheriff Frank Hamer, and Hamer had met with a representative of the New York Syndicate. The deal was simple. The syndicate would give Hamer the location of the Invincibles in exchange for the FBI dropping its investigation into the New York shipping docks. Luciano was trading 2 ghosts for his entire empire. "I'm going into town for some supplies," Ivy Methvin said that evening. He looked at Bonnie and Clyde with a strange, mournful expression. "You kids need anything?" "Just some chocolate," Bonnie said, smiling. It was the last time she would ever smile at a stranger. The hook. As Ivy drove away, Clyde noticed he didn't take the main road. He took the back path, the one they usually used for escapes. Clyde stood up, his heart hammering. "Bonnie, get the bags, now." May 22, 1933, 04 a.m., the backwoods of Louisiana. They spent the night in the car, moving from one hidden spot to another. They felt the net tightening. The legend effect was now working against them. Every time someone saw a Ford V8, they called the law. "We need to get back to Texas," Clyde said, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. "Maybe we can hide in the brush, start over." "There is no starting over, Clyde," Bonnie said softly. She was applying red lipstick, looking into the rearview mirror. She wanted to look beautiful when the end came. She knew the syndicate's patterns. When they were done with a tool, they broke it. Suddenly, a car appeared in the distance. It was Ivy Methvin's truck, seemingly broken down on the side of the road. "Is that Ivy?" Clyde slowed down. His instincts were screaming, but his loyalty to the family Luciano had built around them was a dying ember of hope. "Clyde, don't stop," Bonnie warned. But Clyde was tired. He was so incredibly tired of running. He pulled the Ford V8 alongside Ivy's truck. "Ivy, you okay?" The woods were silent. Not a bird chirped. Not a cricket sounded. The world held its breath. In that moment, Clyde saw something glint in the bushes. Not the chrome of a car, the blue steel of a rifle barrel. "Trap!" Clyde screamed, slamming the car into gear. But it was too late. The syndicate had provided the car, the intel, and the legend. Now, they were providing the execution. The hook. The first bullet didn't hit the car. It hit the windshield, right between Bonnie and Clyde. A warning shot from the ghost of the life they had chosen. May 23, 1934. 9:15 a.m., Highway 154. History records the ambush as a triumph of the law. But the whispers in the underworld tell a different story. They say the guns used by Frank Hamer's posse were supplied by the same men who gave Clyde his first bar. They say the tip-off was timed to the second by a Swiss watch owned by Lucky Luciano. As the Ford V8 approached the bend, 6 men rose from the bushes. The sound was not a series of shots, it was a roar, a mechanical, unrelenting storm of lead. 167 rounds were fired in less than 2 minutes. The Ford V8, the invincible machine, was shredded. The steel plating Luciano had boasted about was useless against the high-powered rifles the posse carried. Inside there was no dialogue. There was only the sound of metal tearing through flesh and the screams of a legend dying. Clyde was hit first, the back of his head exploding against the seat. Bonnie screamed, a long, high-pitched sound that was cut short by a bullet to the throat. The car didn't stop. It rolled slowly into a ditch, the engine still humming, a loyal dog staying with its masters until the very end. The smoke cleared. The air smelled of gasoline and iron. The posse approached cautiously. They didn't see outlaws. They saw two kids, barely out of their 20s, turned into a gruesome tableau of the American dream gone wrong. In New York, Luciano received a telegram. It contained only 3 words. The noise stopped. He folded the paper, lit a cigar, and looked at the clock. It was time for his meeting with the board. The distraction was over. The business could continue. The hook. As the crowds gathered hours later to tear pieces of clothing and hair from the bodies as souvenirs, one man in a sharp suit stood at the back. He placed a single silk scarf on the ground and disappeared into the shadows. June 1934. The aftermath. The legend of Bonnie and Clyde didn't die in that ditch. It grew exactly as Luciano had planned. By making them the ultimate public enemies, the syndicate had created a myth that shielded the true architects of American crime for a generation. Lucky Luciano went on to become the most powerful criminal in history, eventually helping the U.S. government during World War II. He was a statesman of the shadows. Bonnie and Clyde were just the front-page tragedy that made it possible. They were buried in separate cemeteries in Dallas, despite their wish to be laid to rest together. Even in death, the new order denied them their final romantic gesture. But the theme of their lives, the cost of power, the price of protection, remains. They thought they were the kings of the road. In reality, they were just high-speed couriers for a man who never got his hands dirty. The Efeto lender taught the world a lesson. If the law can't catch you, the people who own the law will. Today, the bullet-riddled Ford V8 sits in a casino in Nevada, a monument to a deal that was never meant to be won. People take pictures with it, smiling, oblivious to the fact that the holes in the metal are the exact shape of a betrayal. Luciano once said, "There's no such thing as good money or bad money. There's just money." Bonnie and Clyde learned that the hard way. They paid for the deal of a lifetime with every second of the life they had left.